I think at some point, surely enjoying your 20s, traveling and partying, being single and having lots of relations with others and not having to take things seriously was a thing. Now there is a mental health crisis. We all have to work very hard if not to afford immediate necessities, then to secure a future for ourselves where we won't struggle financially. I increasingly feel that 20s aren't about anything in particular. Neither are teens and 30s onward, aside from just being okay. I think now we are all just trying to be okay, as opposed to great, etc. If you're consistently okay these days, mentally, emotionally, financially, socially, you're doing very well. My parents paid my rent and expense for the 3 years at university. And once I got my first job, I have been saving up to move out, as it is better long-term to stay at home for longer to buy a property than to rent as not have much left to save back when rent was starting to go up. 6 years later, I'm still unable to buy and survive moving out despite having 30% of the value of a 2-bedroom apartment in my area. So my teens will extend to my 30s. People past 18 either have to live with parents or make full use of their time in higher education because it feels like a 1-week holiday. Without parents is the closest they will get to moving out in their 20s when they start employment. All the people who are unlucky to not have a high school or university sweetheart are going to have a tougher time finding a partner to move out with all these apps, websites, and alternatives to meeting someone in public, and is worst if you are not good looking. Not to mention the fact that going above and beyond in work is expected, not congratulated, and jobs becoming more mentally demanding means that newly turned adults will never find love or a slow-paced lifestyle. I could rarely afford to travel in my 20s, but I will say, when I did, it was much cheaper. By the time you hit your 30s, you probably will not be able to tolerate sleeping on a couch or sharing a room with several people. I hope you can take some trips before you get older. Much more fun when you're young and more free-spirited. I'm 30, and I deeply regret not realizing that I wanted the degree I'm taking now. Back then, I'm questioning how I lived my lifestyle back in my early 20s, because I'm living the same way now, and I just don't have the energy. Man, I'm working 8-hour shifts until 3 a.m., 3 times a week, on top of getting up at 6 a.m. and doing 8 hours of classwork. And I barely have enough to go out for a drink once a week. Everything else is going to food tuition, and I'm currently stuck living at home. When I think about having to pay $1,400 a month in rent, amenities on top of tuition and everything else, there's no way I would be able to afford a degree, let alone a social life. How are we meant to enjoy life with inflation fucking us left, right, and center? I'm in my late 30s, and I can say that I hated my 20s. I was miserable, lonely, seemed destined to being upper working class, not in poverty and enough money to afford to take a sick day, but never enough to retire. I struggled to find friends and relationships as I was only a couple years into my working life when the GFC hit. Things didn't start coming together until about 30, when I started finding stability, a permanent job, and decent enough pay where I could afford to buy my first home. It was only in my later 20s where I also found hobbies that I enjoyed, that also helped me join new social circles. In all honesty, your 20s are the primary school of adulthood, where you're just trying to find out where you fit in. Personally, I can't enjoy it much. I enjoyed being 20 until the pandemic hit, and that was about it. Honestly, how are you supposed to really enjoy your 20s when we lost years of our lives, and now everything is so expensive we have no reasonable hope of ever owning a home? Going out anywhere costs money. If you want even a basic sandwich or burger, it'll be over $20. Canadian most places after tax, and sometimes before tax, everyone is very anxious. We don't really expect to get much out of a job if we can get well-paying jobs at all. Many places don't even hire full-time anymore so they can get around costs, for example. And looking at the present and the future is stressful. Summers are now so hot that we have massive forest fires, and talking about the future can't take place without consideration of climate change impacting things. I mean, what is there to actually look forward to? Milk costs like $6, butter costs $8 to $10. It's ridiculous. I hope I'll be able to afford rent after I finish university. I don't plan to have kids or own a home. I try to set realistic expectations now, and those are to have an apartment, get a long-term job, and ideally be able to travel every few years with my partner, even if it's locally. It seems like things are getting progressively worse in many areas. I recognize it's arguably the best time in history, but there are different challenges, and they're still meaningful. I'm watching a decline in opinions on women's rights and on LGBTQ rights, and an increase in extreme views. I'm religious, and it's unbearable how terrible people are to each other. I'm exhausted every time I go online now. There are some horrible people out there, and I'm scared for the future. I think in the 90s we were broke, but even if you were on welfare, you could afford an apartment and food, so most of us had our own places by the time we were 20. This gave us freedom to do what we wanted before we had much in the way of responsibilities. Now the kids have good jobs that don't pay enough for them to move out of their parents' houses. Seriously limits their freedom. I think also back then parents weren't as nice. It wasn't particularly unusual to get yelled at or hit by your parents, so getting out of the house was glorious in comparison, even though it came with more responsibilities. Personally, I still prefer being an adult over being a kid. I can buy all the toys I want and can stay up as late as I want. It's 10 p.m. Who knew my parents were right about that? I'm 35, so my 20s weren't that long ago. When I was 25, in 2014, I lived in an outer suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul. I had a job that paid $55,000 and an apartment that was $650 a month with utilities. I had enough money for rent, a $340 car payment, 2013 car with 20,000 miles, student loans, and I went out drinking every weekend with my friends. I had enough money left over every month that just turned into a savings. Like I wasn't actively trying to save up. I already had funds going into a Roth IRA and 401k, and I still had money left over. Like I went on spontaneous trips, bought a motorcycle, went to Mardi Gras. I had enough money saved up that I was able to go 4 months without working after I was fired. Got a job eventually, but I wasn't sweating it. Even with the new job, I was financially secure enough to quit that job and move to Atlanta for grad school and still keep my car. From 2009 to 2019, my 20s were loads of fun. Got my degrees, but still had a blast. It's a different game since 2020. I can't afford the same lifestyle I had in my 20s now, and I make twice as much. The buying power of the dollar has gone down 47% since I turned 20, which means 20-something-year-olds today would have to make over $100,000 to have the same lifestyle I did in my 20s. I see some people went straight with the economy and whatnot, but I disagree with that. My great-grandparents grew up in the middle of 2 world wars. Do you think you have worse childhood than they did? The reason, in my opinion, is that nowadays people are obsessed with social media and the current news or trends that are happening. Children concern themselves with issues that are not only blown out of proportion in most cases, but issues that have been happening since the beginning of time. Yes, the economy was hit badly because of COVID, but COVID is not the first pandemic, nor do we experience the first economic struggle, nor the first World War threat, nor the first threat that the world is going to come to an end. All young people need is a little bit of different perspective. Stop watching the news. Stop concerning yourself with the environment. You can't save it. There are corporations that pollute this planet way more than your vehicle or your plastic straw, and worrying about that ain't gonna help. Nor feeling guilty. You need to find a purpose for your life and set a goal towards what you can work and use the rest of the time to enjoy life. Because life is truly a miracle. You've been given one chance at it. You don't need a lot of money to have fun, I know, because that was my childhood. You need to invest in finding good people as friends and spending more time outside instead of in front of a screen. Trust me, the moment you start going in nature and doing activities, you will see improvement in your mental health, and you will be more confident, more at peace with yourself. You will have more experiences to share with other people and more people in general in your life. There are many hiking groups for specific sports or activities that you can do outside. Use the youth and strength now because you're getting older every day, and your body will not be the same 20 years from now. Because the cost of everything is through the roof. The minimum qualifications are a college degree. Otherwise, you're better off in a trade. When we were kids, if you knew how to type without looking at a keyboard and knew your way around a Windows system, you were a shoo-in for something IT related. Competition is getting fierce, and while kids are glued to their phones looking at what Instagram famous people have and comparing themselves to them, putting extreme pressure to be the best in school, to get that job, to make that money, to live that lifestyle. When they feel like they've fallen short of the mark, they don't even have the childhood memories to fall back on, to put it all in perspective. Life is not for living for them. It's all trying to keep up and faking it till you make it. At some point, the lack of actually organically growing up comes home to roost. The young people are not stupid. They are incredibly intelligent. But there's a bit of, well, why don't you try it and find out missing? Because everything is searchable and can be YouTubed. How to? Because everything is grim. There are like 1,000 applicants for every job posted. Used car prices are through the roof. Car insurance premiums for a 30-something are ridiculous. I can imagine what a 20-year-old would be. Interest rates are through the roof, so mortgage rates are crazy. That's if you can get enough for a deposit. If not, you will be stuck in the rental loop, which is difficult to get out of. Let's not forget COVID lockdown. That took a lot of important years away from them. I was Mr. Antisocial, but still went to pubs and clubs when I was 18. I think they are just in survival mode.